is paralyzed upon seeing her at a luxury hotel with a young man identical to him. He approached. Bradley Whitmore sat alone in the grand study of his Charleston mansion, staring at the rows of business awards and accolades lining the walls. The heavy silence of the room was broken only by the occasional crackle of the fireplace. To the world, he was the epitome of success, wealthy, powerful, and always in control. But the emptiness inside him told a different story. The years had done little to dull the regret that gnawed at him. 25 years. That's how long it had been since Grace Nolan walked out of his life, or rather, since he had driven her away. He could still see her face, the way her eyes filled with hurt and disbelief when he'd accused her of betrayal. Back then, he'd told himself it was for the best. She was from a humble background, nothing like the kind of woman his family expected him to marry. His father had been particularly vocal, reminding him that associating with someone like Grace would be bad for business. Bradley had caved under the pressure, telling her to leave and never come back. And she hadn't. He'd never forgiven himself for it. Sure, he tried to move on, dating other women, focusing on growing his business empire, even expanding his fortune into global ventures. But nothing filled the void she left behind. Bradley would never admit it to anyone, but losing Grace had been the single biggest mistake of his life. His thoughts were interrupted by the sharp ring of his phone. He picked it up, half hoping the distraction would pull him out of his own head. "Mr. Whitmore," his assistant's voice crackled through the speaker. "Your flight to Miami for tomorrow's meeting has been confirmed." "Good," Bradley muttered, hanging up before she could continue. Business meetings, deals, travel. It was all just routine at this point. None of it excited him anymore. Yet he still threw himself into it, hoping it would drown out the regrets. Miami was just another stop, another high-stakes negotiation, another chance to pretend everything was fine. The next morning, Bradley boarded his private jet, the familiar hum of the engines doing little to calm his restless mind. As the plane took off, his thoughts drifted once again to Grace. He wondered where she was. What had happened to her after that day? Had she married? Had she moved on, leaving him as nothing but a painful memory? The flight landed smoothly, and by the time Bradley stepped into the luxurious hotel lobby in Miami, he had forced Grace out of his mind. There was no point dwelling on the past, not when he had business to handle. But as he crossed the marble floor, something made him stop in his tracks. There, just a few feet away, was a woman with dark, flowing hair, talking animatedly to a young man. Bradley's heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be. No, it was impossible. His mind must be playing tricks on him. But as she turned slightly, giving him a clearer view of her face, a jolt of recognition shot through him. It was Grace. The years had changed her, but there was no doubt. It was her. The same eyes, the same graceful way she moved, and the young man beside her. Bradley froze as he looked at him more closely. The resemblance was uncanny. The boy couldn't have been older than 25, and he looked exactly like Bradley had at that age. Tall, dark hair, sharp jawline. It was like looking into a mirror of his past self. Bradley's pulse quickened, and for a moment, he felt dizzy. Could it be? Was this young man his son? His mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Had Grace? No, it wasn't possible. He hadn't even known she was pregnant. The last time they had spoken, there had been no mention of a child. She had simply left after he accused her of betraying him. Yet, here was this young man who looked so much like him, standing next to Grace as if they had always been together. Bradley's feet felt like lead as he approached them. He didn't have a plan, didn't know what he was going to say, but he couldn't just walk away. He had to know. When Grace turned and met his eyes, her expression shifted from surprise to something colder. Her face hardened, the warmth that had once been there replaced by an icy resolve. She recognized him, no doubt about that. But there was no smile of greeting, no spark of old affection. Instead, she stood still, as if bracing herself for whatever was coming next. The young man, Ethan, Bradley heard Grace call him, looked at Bradley with polite curiosity, oblivious to the storm brewing between his mother and this man who had just entered their world. "Grace," Bradley finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. He could feel the weight of his past mistakes pressing down on him. "It's been a long time." Grace's response was measured, controlled. "It has." Her eyes flickered to Ethan, then back to Bradley. "What are you doing here?" Bradley hesitated, not knowing how to begin. How did you explain 25 years of silence and regret in a few words? "I didn't expect to see you here." Grace nodded, her face betraying nothing. "Nor did I." There was an uncomfortable pause, and Bradley felt the unspoken tension between them growing thicker by the second. His eyes kept drifting to Ethan, who stood quietly beside his mother, unaware of the life-altering revelation that was on the brink of emerging. "I need to talk to you," Bradley said finally, his voice steadier than he felt. "About a lot of things." Grace raised an eyebrow, but before she could respond, Ethan cleared his throat. "I'm going to grab us some coffee, Mom. I'll be back in a bit." As he walked away, Bradley's heart pounded in his chest. The moment of truth was coming, and he wasn't sure he was ready for it. Bradley watched as Ethan walked away, his footsteps echoing softly across the marble floor. The air felt heavy, as if every breath he took was weighted with anticipation. For a moment, he considered stopping Ethan. But what would he say? That he suspected the young man might be his son? That he wanted to make up for decades of mistakes in a single conversation? No, this was something he had to handle carefully, and it started with Grace. He turned back to her, feeling a strange mix of hope and dread. She hadn't walked away, at least not yet. That was something, wasn't it? But the way she stood, arms crossed, shoulders tense, told him she was ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. "Grace, Bradley struggled to find the right words. "I know this is unexpected, and I'm probably the last person you want to see right now, but I need to talk to you." Grace's eyes were steady, her expression calm, but Bradley could see the flicker of old pain behind them. "What could you possibly have to say after all these years?" she asked, her voice low and controlled. Bradley hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. He hadn't planned this, hadn't prepared for the flood of emotions that seeing her again would bring. "I don't know where to start," he admitted, his voice softening. "But I need to understand. I need to know who that young man is." Grace's jaw tightened. "His name is Ethan," she said, her tone giving nothing away. "He's my son." Bradley felt a pang in his chest, like a knife twisting slowly. "My son." The words hung in the air, unsaid but heavy with meaning. "And is he—" Grace's eyes flashed with a warning, cutting him off before he could finish. "He's my son," she repeated more firmly this time. "That's all you need to know." "But is he my son?" The question slipped out before Bradley could stop himself. It was blunt, almost accusatory, but he needed to hear it, needed her to confirm what his gut was already telling him. For a moment, Grace didn't answer. She just stared at him, as if trying to decide whether to tell him the truth or walk away. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Bradley, Ethan is your son." The world seemed to tilt beneath Bradley's feet. He felt like he was falling, spiraling through a vortex of emotions he hadn't experienced in years. Joy, regret, guilt, and fear all tangled together in a chaotic mess. He had a son, 25 years of not knowing, and now, suddenly, he did. But along with that realization came the painful truth. He had missed every moment of Ethan's life. The first steps, the first words, the birthdays, the triumphs and failures, all gone. Lost to time. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice cracking. He didn't mean for it to sound like an accusation, but he couldn't help it. "I had a right to know. Grace's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You had a right," she repeated, her voice rising slightly. "You threw me out, Bradley. You accused me of things I didn't do and told me to leave without even giving me a chance to defend myself. You made it very clear that I wasn't welcome in your life anymore." Bradley flinched at her words. He had no defense, no justification. Everything she said was true, and he hated himself for it. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. "I was wrong. I was so wrong, Grace, and I've regretted it every day since. But I can't change the past. I can only try to make things right now." Grace looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she sighed, a tired, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of all the years between them. "I didn't tell you because I didn't think you'd care," she said quietly. "After the way you treated me, I thought it was better for Ethan not to know you." Bradley felt his heart shatter a little at her words. The thought that she had seen him as so unworthy, so undeserving of their child, was almost more than he could bear. "I would have cared," he said, his voice barely audible. "I care now." "That's easy to say," Grace replied, her eyes hardening again. "But words don't mean much after 25 years, Bradley. You can't just show up out of the blue and expect everything to be okay." "I know," Bradley said, his voice trembling. "I know I can't fix everything overnight, but please, Grace, give me a chance. Let me at least try to be a part of his life. I've lost so much time already, and I don't want to lose any more." Grace studied him, her gaze piercing and intense. "Why now?" she asked. "Why after all these years?" Bradley didn't have a simple answer for that. There was no single moment that had driven him to seek her out, no sudden epiphany. It was a slow, painful realization that had built up over years of loneliness and regret. "Because I'm tired of running away," he said finally. "I'm tired of pretending I don't care. I do care, Grace, more than you'll ever know. And if there's any chance at all that I can be a part of Ethan's life, then I have to take it." Grace's expression softened slightly, but she didn't lower her guard. "Ethan doesn't know about you," she said. "He doesn't know anything about what happened between us. As far as he's concerned, you're just a stranger." The words stung, but Bradley nodded. "I understand. I won't push him. I'll do this on your terms." Grace looked away, as if trying to gather her thoughts. "I'll talk to him," she said after a long pause. "I'll explain everything, but I can't promise he'll want to see you. That's up to him." Bradley felt a flicker of hope, a small spark in the darkness. "That's all I'm asking for," he said. "Just a chance." Grace nodded, but there was no relief in her eyes, only a lingering sadness. "I have to go," she said, glancing in the direction Ethan had gone. "I'll let you know what he decides." Bradley wanted to say more, to beg her not to leave, but he knew better than to push his luck. "Thank you, Grace," he said softly, "for giving me this chance." Grace didn't respond. She turned and walked away, her figure gradually disappearing into the bustle of the hotel lobby. Bradley watched her go, his heart heavy with the knowledge that everything he wanted was hanging by a thread. He had asked for a chance, but he knew he was asking for more than that. He was asking for forgiveness, for redemption, for a second chance at the life he had thrown away. And deep down, he was terrified that he didn't deserve it. The plane ride back to Charleston felt longer than ever. Bradley sat in his private jet, gazing out the window, but his mind was miles away, still in Miami, still replaying the conversation with Grace over and over. Ethan was his son, a son he had never known, never met, and who probably had no idea about his existence. The weight of that realization pressed down on him, suffocating and relentless. Back in his mansion, Bradley could hardly focus on his business affairs. Meetings were missed, calls went unanswered, and his assistant started noticing his unusual distraction. The truth was, nothing seemed to matter anymore, except finding out everything he could about Grace and Ethan. He needed to understand how they had lived all these years, without him. Bradley's first move was to call in a favor from an old contact, a private investigator who had handled some of his more discreet business matters in the past. If anyone could dig up information without drawing too much attention, it was this guy. Bradley hesitated for a moment before making the call, but he knew it was the only way. "Mr. Whitmore, good to hear from you," the investigator greeted, his voice smooth and professional. "What can I do for you?" Bradley took a breath. "I need you to find out everything you can about a woman named Grace Nolan and a young man named Ethan Nolan. They're in Miami. I need to know where they live, what they've been doing, everything." The investigator didn't ask questions. He never did. "Consider it done. I'll have a full report for you within a few days." Bradley hung up, feeling a mix of guilt and anticipation. It felt wrong to be snooping into their lives like this, but what other choice did he have? Grace had said she would talk to Ethan, but he couldn't just sit around and wait. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Over the next few days, Bradley found it impossible to concentrate on anything else. Every time his phone buzzed, his heart skipped a beat, hoping it was Grace with news. But no calls came, and as the days dragged on, he began to wonder if she would ever reach out. Maybe Ethan had refused to see him, and Grace had decided it was best to cut all ties. The thought made his stomach churn, but he knew he had no right to complain. After all, this was his mess, one he had created years ago with his own foolishness. Finally, the call he had been waiting for came, but it wasn't from Grace. It was the investigator. "I've got the information you asked for, Mr. Whitmore," the man said. "Would you like me to send it over, or do you prefer to discuss it in person?" Bradley hesitated. Part of him was afraid of what he might find out. "Send it to my email," he said finally, his voice tight. "I'll take a look." It took him nearly an hour to gather the courage to open the report. When he did, his hands trembled as he scrolled through the pages, his eyes scanning for details that might fill in the blanks of the past 25 years. There was information about Grace's work history, where she had lived, even a few photographs of her and Ethan over the years. One picture, in particular, caught his eye. It was of Ethan, standing in a graduation gown, smiling proudly as Grace beamed beside him. He looked happy, confident, and Bradley felt a pang of jealousy mixed with pride. Ethan had grown up into a fine young man, and Bradley hadn't been there to see it. The report also revealed that Grace had been working as a manager at a mid-sized company in Miami, and from all appearances, she had done quite well for herself. She had raised Ethan alone, and she had managed to provide for him despite the odds. Bradley couldn't help but admire her resilience, but it only made his guilt heavier. She had done everything he had been too weak to do. She had been strong, and he had been a coward. Then he reached the part of the report that made his heart stop. It was a brief mention, almost a footnote, but it was enough to change everything. Ethan Nolan was listed as the sole heir to a substantial trust fund, left to him by someone named William Nolan, Grace's grandfather. According to the investigator, William Nolan had been a businessman in his own right, and when he passed away, he had left everything to Grace and, by extension, to Ethan. Bradley sat back, trying to process what he was reading. Grace had come from a humble background, or at least that's what he had always assumed. But here she was, with ties to a family fortune that rivaled his own. He realized, with a bitter taste in his mouth, that he had never really known Grace at all. He had seen what he wanted to see, judged her by the standards of his own world, and never bothered to learn who she truly was. The revelation hit him like a punch to the gut. All this time, he had thought of Grace as the vulnerable, naive girl who needed his protection, but she didn't need him. She never had. While he had been busy building his empire, she had been quietly building a life of her own, one that was just as successful, if not more so, than his. Bradley knew he had to see Grace again, but this time, he had to be honest. No more pretending, no more games. He had to tell her everything, about how much he regretted pushing her away, about how he wanted to be a part of Ethan's life, and about how much it hurt to realize that he might never have that chance. The investigator's report had given him another piece of the puzzle, but it wasn't enough. He needed to hear it from Grace herself, and more than that, he needed to see Ethan, to tell him the truth about why he hadn't been there, and to beg for the chance to make things right. That evening, as he sat alone in his study, Bradley picked up the phone and dialed Grace's number. His hands were shaking, but he forced himself to stay calm as he listened to the ring, praying she would answer. "Hello?" Her voice was cautious, guarded, but unmistakably Grace. "It's Bradley," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I've been thinking about what you said, and I want to see you again. I need to explain everything. Please. Grace." There was a long pause, and Bradley held his breath, afraid she might hang up. But then she spoke, her tone measured and careful. "I spoke to Ethan. He knows who you are." The words sent a jolt through Bradley. "And?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "And he's confused, angry, and he doesn't understand why you were never there," Grace said, her words sharp but not unkind. "But he's willing to talk. He's willing to meet with you, Bradley, but you need to be prepared. This isn't going to be easy." Bradley felt a wave of relief, mixed with anxiety. This was what he had wanted, but now that it was real, he didn't know if he was ready. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, his voice firm. "Just tell me when and where." Grace sighed softly. "Tomorrow evening. There's a cafe near our apartment. I'll text you the address. Be there at 6. "Thank you, Grace," Bradley said, his throat tight with emotion. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," she replied. "This is just the beginning. We'll see how things go." As she hung up, Bradley sat back and exhaled, a sense of dread settling over him. He was about to face the son he had never known, and he had no idea what to expect. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to make things right. Bradley arrived at the cafe half an hour early. He had barely slept the night before, his mind racing with every possible scenario of what could happen when he saw Ethan again. Now, as he sat by the window, nursing a cup of coffee he didn't even want, he felt his nerves fraying. He glanced around, taking in the cozy interior of the cafe, the hum of conversation, the clink of cups, and the soft, warm lighting. It was the kind of place that felt welcoming, but today, it felt like the setting for a showdown. When the door opened, and Grace walked in, Bradley's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't changed much. Sure, there were a few lines on her face that hadn't been there before, but she still had that same grace and poise that had captivated him all those years ago. She spotted him and hesitated for a second before walking over to his table. Bradley stood up, unsure of whether he should offer a hug or just a polite nod. He settled for the nod, feeling awkward and out of place. "Hi?" he said, his voice low, almost as if he were afraid to scare her off. "Hi," she replied, sitting down across from him. "I'm surprised you were early." Bradley tried to smile, but it felt strained. "I didn't want to risk missing you." Grace looked at him, her eyes steady and clear, as if she were searching for something in his face. "Well, here I am," she said, "and Ethan will be here soon." "Thank you for arranging this," Bradley said, trying to keep his tone sincere. "I can't imagine how difficult it must have been." Grace's expression softened slightly, but there was still a guardedness there, a wall that hadn't been there before. "It wasn't easy," she admitted, "but I didn't want to be the one to keep him from knowing the truth. He deserves to hear it, even if it's painful." Bradley nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I'm ready to tell him everything." There was a pause, and then Grace leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Before he gets here, there are a few things I need to say to you, Bradley." Bradley felt a pang of dread. I understand. No, I don't think you do, Grace said, her voice calm but firm. When you threw me out all those years ago, you didn't just hurt me. You took away any chance Ethan had of knowing his father. You robbed him of that, and you did it without even giving me a chance to explain. Bradley wanted to protest, to defend himself, but he couldn't. She was right. He had been young, foolish, and full of pride. I was wrong, he said quietly. I was scared, and I let that fear make decisions for me. But that doesn't excuse what I did. Grace's lips pressed into a thin line. No, it doesn't. But the fact that you're admitting it means something. I'm not here to make this easier for you, Bradley. I'm here because Ethan deserves to know who you are, and because maybe, just maybe, there's still a chance for you to be a part of his life. Bradley felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly tempered by the fear that she was about to take it away. I want to be a part of his life, he said, his voice trembling, more than anything. Then be honest with him, Grace said, leaning back in her chair. Tell him everything. Don't try to sugarcoat it or make excuses. He's a smart kid, and he'll see right through it if you do. Bradley nodded. I will. They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. Bradley wanted to ask her so many things. How she had managed all these years. How she had felt raising their son on her own. If she had ever thought about him. But he didn't dare. This wasn't about him, he reminded himself. This was about Ethan. The doorbell chimed, and Bradley's heart leapt into his throat as he saw Ethan walk in. He was taller than Bradley had imagined, with the same dark hair and sharp features that Bradley remembered from his own youth. There was no mistaking the resemblance. Ethan looked around the cafe, spotted Grace, and then noticed Bradley sitting across from her. Bradley could see the confusion in his eyes, but also a hint of curiosity. Ethan approached the table slowly, as if he were afraid it might disappear if he moved too quickly. Hi, Mom, he said, giving Grace a quick hug before turning to Bradley. And you must be Bradley. The way he said it, with just a touch of formality, made Bradley's heart ache. Yes, he said, trying to smile. I'm Bradley. It's nice to meet you, Ethan. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat down, his posture stiff and guarded. My mom told me a bit about you, he said, his voice calm but distant. But I'd like to hear it from you. Bradley glanced at Grace, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. Of course, he said, turning back to Ethan. I don't even know where to start. Maybe start with why you weren't there, Ethan said, his eyes locking onto Bradley's. Why did you leave? Bradley felt like he had been punched in the gut. He had expected the question, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. I didn't leave, he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. Your mother and I, we were together a long time ago, but I made a terrible mistake. I thought she had betrayed me and I pushed her away. I was wrong, and I've regretted it every day since. Ethan's expression didn't change. And you didn't try to find out the truth. Bradley shook his head, his voice breaking. No, I was stubborn and I was scared. I thought if I didn't face it, it would just go away. But it didn't. It only got worse. Ethan looked at him for a long moment, and Bradley could see the hurt and anger swirling behind his eyes. So, you just moved on? Pretended like it never happened? No, Bradley said, his voice barely above a whisper. I tried to move on, but I couldn't. I missed your mother, and I missed the chance to know you. I didn't even know you existed, Ethan, and that's my fault. I should have tried harder. I should have been there. Ethan's jaw clenched, and Bradley braced himself for an angry outburst, but instead, Ethan just shook his head. I don't know what to say, he said, his voice trembling. I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about all of this. Bradley felt his heart breaking all over again. You don't have to feel anything, Ethan. I don't expect you to forgive me. And I don't expect you to suddenly want me in your life. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Ethan glanced at Grace, who reached out and took his hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You don't have to decide anything right now, Ethan," she said gently. "Take your time." For a moment, the three of them just sat there, a strange, fragile kind of peace hanging in the air. Bradley wanted to reach out, to hold on to that peace, but he knew it was up to Ethan. "I'll think about it," Ethan said finally, his voice barely audible. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you, but I'll think about it." Bradley nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. "That's all I can ask." They sat in silence for a few more minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Grace stood up, signaling that it was time to go. "We'll be in touch, Bradley," she said. "Thank you for being honest." Bradley watched as Grace and Ethan walked out of the cafe, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he still had a long way to go. But for the first time in years, he felt like he had taken a step in the right direction. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The drive home from the cafe was silent. Ethan stared out the window, his mind buzzing with everything he had just heard. Bradley was his father, the man he had met just a few hours ago, who had sat across the table looking both desperate and remorseful, was the father he never knew he had. Ethan wasn't sure how he felt about it. Angry, confused, curious, all of those emotions jumbled together in a way that made his head spin. When they reached their apartment, Grace parked the car and turned off the engine, but neither of them moved to get out. She glanced at Ethan, trying to gauge what was going through his mind. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked gently. Ethan shook his head, still staring straight ahead. "I don't know. I mean, how am I supposed to feel? I just found out that my dad, my actual dad, has been out there this whole time, and he didn't even know I existed." Grace sighed, her heart aching for him. "I know it's a lot to process, honey, and it's okay if you don't know how to feel. You don't have to figure it all out right now." Ethan finally turned to look at her, his eyes filled with questions. "But why didn't you tell him? Why didn't you ever tell me?" The question hit Grace like a punch, and she took a moment before answering. "It wasn't an easy decision," she said quietly. "When I found out I was pregnant, I was scared. Your father and we had a falling out, and he made it clear he didn't want me in his life. I didn't think he'd want you either. I didn't want to put you through that kind of rejection." Ethan frowned, trying to make sense of it. "But you just decided that for him? What if he would have wanted me?" "I didn't know," Grace admitted, her voice trembling. "And maybe I made the wrong choice. But at the time, I thought I was protecting you. I didn't want you to grow up feeling unwanted, and I was afraid that if he knew, he would have rejected both of us." Ethan was quiet for a long time, processing her words. Part of him understood why she had done it, but another part of him couldn't help feeling like something precious had been taken from him. "It's not fair," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper.
"It's not fair that I never got to know him." "I know," Grace said, tears welling up in her eyes. "And I'm so sorry, Ethan. I did what I thought was best, but I know I hurt you in the process." I would. Ethan didn't respond right away. He was still angry, but he could see the pain in his mother's eyes, and he knew she wasn't trying to hurt him.
She had always done her best, always been there for him, and he couldn't hate her for trying to protect him, even if it meant making a difficult choice. "What do you think I should do?" he asked, his voice small and unsure. "About him?" Grace hesitated, not wanting to sway him one way or the other. "I think that's a decision only you can make," she said carefully. "But if you want my opinion, I think you should at least give him a chance. Hear him out. He's made a lot of mistakes, but he seems like he genuinely wants to make things right." Ethan nodded, though he wasn't sure he fully agreed. He just showed up out of nowhere. I don't know if I can trust him." "I understand," Grace said. "And if you decide you don't want to have a relationship with him, I'll support you. But I think it's worth considering. You might find that there's more to him than you realize." They sat there for a few more moments, the silence stretching between them, before Ethan finally spoke again. "I'll think about it," he said, echoing the words he had used at the cafe. "But I'm not making any promises." "That's all anyone can ask," Grace said softly, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "Just take your time." Over the next few days, Ethan found it hard to concentrate on anything else. He went to work, went through the motions, but his mind kept drifting back to Bradley. Every time he thought about that afternoon at the cafe, he felt a rush of emotions he couldn't quite control. There was anger, of course, for all the years he had missed out on. But there was also a strange curiosity, a desire to know more about the man who had suddenly appeared in his life. One evening, after a particularly restless day, Ethan decided he needed answers. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Bradley's number, the one Grace had given him after their conversation at the cafe. His thumb hovered over the call button, hesitating for just a moment before he pressed it. The phone rang twice before Bradley answered. "Hello?" His voice was tense, as if he had been expecting the call, but wasn't sure if it would ever come. "It's Ethan," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I thought maybe we could talk." There was a brief pause, and then Bradley's voice softened. "Of course, Ethan. I'm glad you called. Where would you like to meet?" Ethan hadn't really thought that far ahead. "I don't know. Maybe somewhere quiet, where we can actually talk." "Okay," Bradley said, sounding relieved. "There's a park near my hotel. We could meet there, if that's all right with you." "Sure," Ethan replied, feeling a bit of his own tension ease. "Tomorrow, after work." "Tomorrow it is," Bradley said. "I'll see you then." Ethan hung up the phone, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what he was expecting, but part of him felt like he had just set something irreversible into motion. Now there was no turning back. The next day, Ethan arrived at the park just as the sun was beginning to set. The sky was streaked with shades of orange and pink, and there was a cool breeze rustling through the trees. He spotted Bradley sitting on a bench, staring out at the small pond in the middle of the park. For a moment, Ethan considered turning around and leaving, but he forced himself to keep walking. Bradley looked up as Ethan approached, a hopeful but cautious smile spreading across his face. "Ethan," he said, standing up, "I'm glad you came." Ethan nodded, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Yeah, well, I figured I might as well hear what you have to say." Bradley gestured for Ethan to sit, and they both settled on the bench, a comfortable distance apart. For a few moments, neither of them spoke, the silence filled only by the distant sounds of children playing and dogs barking. "I'm not going to make excuses," Bradley began, his voice low. "I know I messed up. I hurt your mother, and I hurt you, even if I didn't realize it at the time. But I want to be honest with you, Ethan, and I want to be a part of your life, if you'll let me." Ethan turned to look at him, his expression unreadable. "Why now?" he asked. "Why did you suddenly decide to find us after all this time?" Bradley hesitated, trying to find the right words. "Because I've spent the last 25 years pretending that I was okay, that I didn't need to deal with my mistakes. But I'm tired of pretending. I want to make things right, and I want to be there for you, even if it's a little late." Ethan didn't respond right away. He stared down at his shoes, thinking about everything Grace had told him, about everything Bradley was saying now. "I don't know if I can just forgive you," he said finally. "It's not that simple." "I know," Bradley said, his voice soft. "And I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to earn it." Ethan looked up, meeting Bradley's eyes for the first time. "I'm not making any promises," he said, echoing the words he had used before. "But I'll think about it." Bradley nodded, a flicker of hope lighting up his eyes. That's more than I could have asked for. As they sat there watching the sun dip below the horizon, Ethan felt a strange sense of calm. He still didn't know how he was supposed to feel about Bradley, or if he would ever be able to truly accept him as his father. But for the first time, he felt like he was starting to understand, just a little bit, where Bradley was coming from. Maybe that was enough, for now. Over the next few weeks, Bradley made several attempts to connect with Ethan. He didn't want to push too hard. He knew that would only drive Ethan away. But he also didn't want to miss any opportunity to show that he was sincere about building a relationship. He started small, sending text messages to check in or share little anecdotes from his day. Sometimes, Ethan would respond with a polite, short reply, but more often than not, the conversations would fizzle out quickly. Bradley understood. This wasn't going to be easy. He had to be patient. One Saturday morning, as Bradley was reading the newspaper in his hotel room, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and saw a message from Ethan. "Hey, are you free later today?" Bradley's heart skipped a beat. It was the first time Ethan had reached out to him without prompting. He quickly typed back, "Yes, I'm free. What's up? Do you want to grab lunch?" Ethan replied, "There's a diner near the park. I thought we could meet there around noon." Bradley smiled as he typed, "Sounds great. I'll see you there." When he arrived at the diner, Ethan was already seated in a booth by the window, a cup of coffee in front of him. Bradley hesitated at the entrance, suddenly feeling nervous, but then he took a deep breath and walked over. "Hey, Ethan," he said, trying to sound casual. "Thanks for inviting me." Ethan nodded, offering a small smile. "I figured we should give this a shot. You know, see if we can actually talk." Bradley sat down, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. "I'd like that." For the first few minutes, they made awkward small talk. Ethan asked about Bradley's work, and Bradley asked about Ethan's job, trying to find common ground. But the conversation felt forced, like they were two strangers struggling to make polite conversation at a party. Finally, Ethan set down his coffee cup and looked directly at Bradley. "I want to know about you," he said, his tone serious. "Not just the business stuff, but who you are. I know you're my father, but I don't really know you." Bradley was taken aback by the directness of the question. "I'm not sure where to start," he admitted. "What do you want to know?" "Why did you push my mom away?" Ethan asked, his eyes searching Bradley's. "She said you thought she betrayed you. What was that about?" Bradley winced. It was a question he had dreaded, but he knew he couldn't avoid it forever. "It's complicated," he began, choosing his words carefully. "Back then, I was under a lot of pressure from my family, from the business. And there were rumors, things people said that made me doubt your mom. Instead of talking to her, I made assumptions. I accused her of things she didn't do." Ethan's expression hardened. "So, you just believed the rumors, without even giving her a chance to explain?" "I know how bad it sounds," Bradley said, his voice heavy with regret. "And I was a coward. I didn't want to face the possibility that I was wrong, so I took the easy way out. I pushed her away, and I've regretted it every day since." Ethan was silent, processing Bradley's words. "Do you still talk to your family?" he asked after a moment. "No," Bradley said. "Not anymore. After my father passed away, I realized how much of my life I had spent trying to live up to his expectations. I tried to reconnect with them, but it didn't work out. We're not close." Ethan looked down at his hands, his brow furrowed. "So, you were alone too." Bradley hadn't thought of it that way, but it was true. "Yes," he said quietly. "I was alone, and it was my own fault. I thought if I focused on the business, it would be enough. But it wasn't." Ethan took a sip of his coffee, his eyes distant. I always wondered what it would be like to have a dad, he said softly. I used to see other kids with their fathers, and I would make up stories about you. I'd imagine that you were off on some adventure, and one day you'd come back and explain everything. Bradley felt a lump form in his throat. I'm so sorry, Ethan, he said, his voice cracking. I wish I could go back and change everything, but I can't. All I can do is try to be here now if you'll let me. Ethan looked up, meeting Bradley's gaze. I don't know if I can just forget everything, he said, but I'm willing to try. I want to see if we can have something. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm willing to find out. Bradley's heart lifted. That's all I've ever wanted, he said. Thank you, Ethan. I know this isn't easy, and I'm grateful that you're giving me a chance. Ethan nodded, but there was still a hint of hesitation in his eyes. Just don't expect too much too fast, he warned. I'm still figuring all of this out, and I need time. I understand, Bradley said. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. They spent the rest of the lunch talking more comfortably, sharing stories about their lives, their interests, and their work. It was still awkward at times, but there were moments when the conversation flowed naturally, and Bradley could see glimpses of a connection forming. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. After lunch, as they were walking out of the diner, Ethan turned to Bradley. I'm going to visit my mom tonight, he said. She's been worried about how all of this is affecting me. I think you should come with me. Bradley hesitated. Are you sure? I don't want to intrude. It's not about that, Ethan said. I think it's time the three of us had an honest conversation. No more secrets, no more guessing, just the truth. Bradley nodded, feeling a mixture of apprehension and hope. All right, I'll be there. That evening, Bradley found himself standing outside Grace's apartment, his heart pounding as he waited for Ethan to open the door. When it swung open, he was greeted by the familiar sight of Grace, who gave him a small, hesitant smile. Ethan said you'd be coming, she said, stepping aside to let him in. Yeah? Bradley said, his voice soft. He thought it was time we all talked. Grace nodded, leading him into the living room, where Ethan was already seated. I think he's right, she said, sitting down beside Ethan. We've been dancing around this for too long. It's time to lay everything out on the table. Bradley took a seat across from them, feeling a strange sense of déjà vu. I agree, he said. I want to be honest with both of you, even if it's difficult. I owe you that much. Ethan glanced at Grace, then back at Bradley. I just want to know why, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Why did you push her away? And why did it take you so long to come back? Bradley took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. I pushed your mom away because I was scared, he said. I was scared of what people would think, of how it would affect the business, and I let that fear control me. I didn't realize how much I was hurting her until it was too late. And as for why it took me so long, I don't have a good answer for that. I was afraid of facing the consequences of my actions, and I hid behind my work. But I'm done hiding now. There was a heavy silence as Ethan and Grace processed his words. Finally, Grace spoke, her voice soft but firm. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you, Bradley, she said, but I appreciate your honesty. That's more than I ever thought I'd get from you. Bradley nodded, his eyes glistening. I understand. And I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking for a chance to make things right. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. I think that's fair, he said. We're not going to figure everything out tonight, but this is a start, and maybe that's enough for now. As they sat together, the tension in the room slowly began to ease. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't exactly a resolution, but it was a step forward. For the first time, Bradley felt like he could see a path to redemption, however uncertain it might be. And that was more than he had dared to hope for. The days following their conversation at Grace's apartment were a strange mix of tension and hope. For Ethan, it felt like a fragile truce had been formed, a tentative understanding that things might get better, but only if they all made an effort. For Bradley, it was a chance, a slim, precious chance to make amends and reconnect with the two people he had wronged the most. And for Grace, it was an opportunity to finally confront the man who had caused her so much pain and to see if there was still anything worth salvaging between them. One afternoon, Grace received a text from Bradley asking if they could meet for coffee. He wanted to talk, just the two of them. She hesitated before replying, but eventually agreed. She had questions of her own, things she needed to say that she couldn't share in front of Ethan. Maybe this was the chance to finally get some answers. They met at a small, quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city, far from the busy streets of Miami. Grace arrived first, choosing a corner table by the window. She ordered a coffee and sat, watching people pass by outside, trying to organize her thoughts. When Bradley walked in, she felt a familiar jolt in her chest, a mix of nostalgia and hurt that she hadn't been able to shake, even after all these years. "Hey," Bradley said, giving her a small, tentative smile as he approached. "Thanks for agreeing to meet." Grace nodded, motioning for him to sit. "I figured we still have a lot to talk about," she said, her tone neutral. Bradley sat down, clasping his hands together on the table. "Yeah, we do," he agreed. For a moment, they just looked at each other, and Grace could see the years etched on his face, lines that hadn't been there before, signs of stress and regret. He didn't look like the confident, powerful man she remembered. He looked tired. "I want to start by saying I'm sorry," Bradley began, his voice quiet but steady. "Not just for what happened between us, but for everything that came after. I was selfish and cowardly, and I hurt you in ways I can never make up for. I should have listened to you. I should have trusted you." Grace listened, her expression unreadable. "You didn't trust me," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You threw me out because of rumors, because of what other people said, and you didn't even give me a chance to explain myself." "I know," Bradley said, his eyes filled with regret. "I was wrong. I was under pressure. But that's no excuse. I let my fear and my pride control me, and I've regretted it every day since." Grace took a sip of her coffee, letting his words hang in the air for a moment. "Why didn't you ever try to find me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you regretted it so much, why didn't you reach out?" Bradley sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I wanted to," he said, "but I was afraid that you would slam the door in my face, that you had moved on and didn't want anything to do with me. So I convinced myself that it was better to stay away, to let you live your life without me complicating it." Grace's eyes flashed with a mix of sadness and anger. "You never gave me the chance to make that decision," she said. "You made it for me, just like you did back then. Do you have any idea what it was like, raising Ethan on my own? Knowing that you were out there, living your life, while I was struggling to make ends meet?" Bradley felt a pang of guilt so sharp it was almost physical. "I can't imagine," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I know that nothing I say can change what you went through. But I want you to know that I'm sorry, Grace. I wish I could go back and do things differently. I wish I could have been there for you and for Ethan." Grace looked down at her coffee, swirling the spoon around the cup. "I used to wish that too," she said softly. "But I realized a long time ago that wishing doesn't change anything. I had to move on, and I had to be strong for Ethan. That's what kept me going." Bradley nodded, understanding the truth in her words. "You did an amazing job," he said. He's incredible, and that's because of you." For the first time, Grace allowed herself a small, sad smile. "Thank you," she said. "But he deserves to know his father, even if it's not the father I thought you would be." Bradley flinched at that, but he knew it was the truth. "I want to be better," he said, "for him and for you. I know I've made mistakes, but I want to try to make things right." Grace met his eyes, and for a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of the warmth that had once been there. "I'm not sure what making things right looks like, Bradley," she said, "but I'm willing to see if it's possible." The conversation shifted then, moving away from the past and toward the present. Bradley asked Grace about her life, about how she had managed to build a career and raise Ethan on her own. She told him about the struggles, the late nights, and the small victories. As she spoke, Bradley realized just how strong she had been, how much she had endured. He felt a deep sense of admiration for her, mixed with a painful awareness of everything he had missed. "I always thought of you as this fragile, delicate person," Bradley said, shaking his head, "but you're stronger than anyone I've ever met." Grace laughed softly, a sound that was both bitter and amused. "I didn't have a choice," she said. "I had to be strong because there was no one else to lean on. But I'm not fragile, Bradley. I never was." "I see that now," Bradley said, his voice sincere, "and I'm sorry I didn't see it before." They talked for hours, sharing stories and memories, some good, some painful. There were moments of silence, too, where they just sat together, lost in their thoughts. Bradley found himself remembering all the things he had loved about Grace, the way she laughed, the way she could make even the simplest things feel special. But he also saw the distance that had grown between them, a gap that might never be fully bridged. As the afternoon turned to evening, Bradley knew there was one more thing he needed to say. "Grace," he began, hesitating for a moment, "I know we can't go back to the way things were. Too much has happened, but I would like to be a part of your life, if you'll let me. Not just because of Ethan, but because I still care about you. I always have." Grace looked at him, her eyes softening slightly. "I don't know if we can ever be what we were," she said, "but I think we can be something. I don't hate you, Bradley. I'm just cautious. I need to know that you're serious about this, and that you're willing to do the work." "I am," Bradley said, leaning forward. "I want to earn your trust back, even if it takes the rest of my life. I want to be there for you and for Ethan, in whatever way you'll allow." Grace nodded, a sense of calm settling over her. "Then let's start with that," she said, "one step at a time." As they left the cafe, walking out into the cool evening air, Bradley felt a sense of hope that he hadn't felt in years. It was fragile, like a delicate thread, but it was there. He knew there were still challenges ahead, still a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. He turned to Grace, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "Thank you," he said, "for giving me this chance. I won't waste it." Grace smiled, a small, cautious smile, but a smile nonetheless. "We'll see, Bradley," she said. "We'll see." The next week, Bradley received a message from Ethan asking if they could all have dinner together. It was an unexpected but welcome invitation, and Bradley felt a mix of nerves and anticipation as he prepared for the evening. The last few weeks had been tentative steps toward building a connection, but this felt different, like a real opportunity to move forward. They chose a small, quiet Italian restaurant not far from Ethan's apartment. Bradley arrived early, as usual, and was greeted by a friendly hostess who led him to a corner table. He sat down, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He had been given a chance to have a family, something he never thought he would get again, and he was determined not to mess it up. Grace and Ethan arrived together a few minutes later. Bradley stood up, offering a nervous smile. "Good to see you both," he said, pulling out a chair for Grace. "Hi, Bradley," Grace replied, her tone warm but still reserved. Ethan nodded a greeting, his expression cautious but not unfriendly. It was a small improvement, and Bradley would take it. Once they were seated, there was a moment of awkward silence as they all scanned the menus. Bradley wasn't sure how to start the conversation, but Ethan broke the silence first. "So, how have things been at the hotel?" he asked, glancing at Bradley. "You still staying there?" "Yes," Bradley said, nodding. I've been in Miami longer than I expected, but I don't mind. It's given me more time to figure things out." Ethan raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Figure things out, huh? That's one way of putting it." Bradley chuckled, feeling a bit more at ease. "Yes, well, I'm trying to be less of a workaholic these days. Turns out there's more to life than business." Grace smiled at that, a genuine smile that warmed Bradley's heart. "That's good to hear," she said. "You always did have a hard time switching off." The waiter came by to take their orders, and once they had chosen their meals, the conversation flowed a bit more naturally. They talked about light things, restaurants they liked, movies, and sports. Bradley learned that Ethan was a fan of basketball, something he had never known before. Grace shared stories about her work and how she had juggled her career with raising Ethan. It was a glimpse into a life Bradley had missed, and he felt both grateful and sad as he listened. After their food arrived, there was a lull in the conversation, and Bradley took the opportunity to address something that had been on his mind. "I'm glad you suggested this dinner, Ethan," he said, looking at his son. "It means a lot to me that we can spend time together like this." Ethan took a bite of his pasta, considering Bradley's words. "I'm still trying to figure out what to make of all this," he said, his tone honest. "I mean, you're my dad, but you're also a stranger. I want to get to know you, but I need to do it on my own terms." Bradley nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I understand, and I'm willing to go at whatever pace you're comfortable with. I just want to be here, whatever that looks like." Ethan glanced at Grace, as if seeking reassurance, and she gave him a small nod. "I appreciate that," Ethan said. "I've been thinking about what you said, about wanting to be a part of my life. I don't know what that means yet, but I'm willing to give it a try, as long as we're honest with each other." "Of course," Bradley said quickly. "I don't want to hide anything from you." Ethan hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Then I have a question. Why did it take you so long to find us? If you regret what happened with Mom, why did you wait 25 years? Bradley took a deep breath, bracing himself for the question he knew would come sooner or later. "I was afraid," he admitted, "afraid of what I'd find and afraid of what it would mean for me. I was selfish, Ethan. I let my fear and my pride get in the way, and it cost me everything that mattered. I can't change that, but I'm trying to make up for it now." Ethan's eyes softened slightly, though his expression remained guarded. "I guess I can understand that," he said. "I'm scared, too. Scared of letting you in and then having you disappear again." Bradley's heart ached at the honesty in Ethan's words. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly. "I've made a lot of mistakes, but I won't make that one again. I'm here, and I'm not going to disappear." Ethan didn't respond right away, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Maybe hope, maybe uncertainty. Bradley couldn't tell, but it was enough to give him a sliver of optimism. The rest of the dinner was more relaxed, with Ethan and Grace sharing stories about their life together. Bradley listened intently, laughing along with their anecdotes, but also feeling a pang of regret for all the moments he had missed. He tried to focus on the present, on the fact that they were here now, and that was what mattered. As they finished their meal, Grace turned to Ethan. "Do you want to tell him?" she asked gently, and Ethan's expression grew serious. Bradley's heart skipped a beat, wondering what she was referring to. Ethan took a deep breath and looked at Bradley. "I want to invite you to my graduation," he said, his voice steady but nervous. "It's in a few weeks, and I'd like you to be there." Bradley's eyes widened, and for a moment, he was too stunned to speak. "Your graduation?" he repeated, a smile spreading across his face. I'd be honored, Ethan. Thank you." Ethan relaxed a little, as if relieved that Bradley had accepted. "It's kind of a big deal for me," he said, his tone lighter. "And I figured, if we're going to try to build something, this is a good place to start." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," Bradley said, his voice filled with emotion. "Thank you, Ethan. This means more to me than you know." Grace watched them, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She reached out and placed a hand on Ethan's arm, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "Both of you." The three of them sat there for a moment, letting the significance of the moment sink in. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a step in the right direction, a sign that things could get better if they were willing to work at it. Bradley felt a sense of peace, a feeling that he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, he felt like he was part of something real, something that mattered. As they left the restaurant, Bradley walked with Grace and Ethan to their car. The evening air was cool, and there was a gentle breeze rustling through the trees. Bradley hesitated, then turned to Grace. "Can I walk you to your door?" he asked, his voice tentative. Grace glanced at Ethan, who nodded and got into the car, giving them a moment alone. She turned back to Bradley. "Sure," she said. "Why not?" They walked in silence for a few moments, the sounds of the city around them. Bradley could feel the weight of everything he wanted to say, but he didn't know how to put it into words. Finally, he stopped and turned to face her. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For giving me this chance. I know it's not easy, and I don't take it for granted." Grace looked at him, her eyes softening. "I'm still cautious, Bradley," she said, "but I can see that you're trying, and I appreciate that." "I am," Bradley said, taking a step closer. "I'm trying, and I won't stop. Not until I've made things right." Grace didn't respond right away. She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Then, she smiled. A small, gentle smile that made Bradley's heart swell. "We'll see," she said. "One step at a time, right?" Bradley nodded, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. One step at a time. As they reached the car, Grace turned to him one last time. "Good night, Bradley," she said softly. "Good night, Grace," he replied, watching as she got into the car and drove away. He stood there for a moment, under the streetlights, feeling a sense of hope that he hadn't felt in a long time. It was fragile, but it was real, and he was determined not to let it slip away. As the day of Ethan's graduation approached, Bradley found himself thinking more and more about the future. He had made progress, but there were still so many things left unsaid, so many bridges yet to be rebuilt. He hoped that attending Ethan's graduation would be a step towards strengthening their bond. But he also couldn't shake the feeling that there were still pieces of the past he didn't fully understand, especially when it came to Grace. A few days before the graduation, Bradley received an unexpected call from an old business contact. It was a man named Daniel, someone Bradley had worked with many years ago but hadn't kept in touch with. They exchanged pleasantries, and then Daniel got to the point of his call. "Bradley, I'm in town for a conference, and I heard an interesting story. I ran into someone who mentioned a woman named Grace Nolan, and I thought of you. I didn't realize she was still in Miami." Bradley's heart skipped a beat at the mention of Grace's name. "Yeah, she's here," he said, trying to keep his voice casual. "Why do you ask?" "Well, I heard she's been quite successful," Daniel continued. "I didn't know much about her back then, but it seems like she's done quite well for herself. Apparently, she's managed to build a business from the ground up. Impressive, considering where she started." Bradley was silent for a moment, processing what Daniel was saying. He knew Grace had worked hard to provide for Ethan, but he hadn't realized just how successful she had become. "What kind of business?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. "Investment, mostly," Daniel replied. "She inherited a decent sum from her grandfather, but she didn't just sit on it. She used it to build her own portfolio, made some smart moves, and now she's got a pretty solid enterprise. It's rare to see someone turn an inheritance into something more, especially without any prior experience." Bradley felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride, because Grace had clearly thrived despite everything, and a hint of embarrassment, because he had underestimated her. He had always seen her as the sweet, gentle woman he had known all those years ago. But clearly, she had grown into someone far more formidable. "That doesn't surprise me," Bradley said, smiling slightly. "She's always been strong, stronger than people gave her credit for." Daniel chuckled. "Well, it sounds like she's done more than just survive. She's built something impressive. I thought you'd like to know." After the call ended, Bradley sat back in his chair, deep in thought. He realized how little he truly knew about the woman Grace had become. He had been so focused on his own regrets and guilt that he hadn't really considered what her life might have been like without him. She had not only managed to raise their son alone, but had also built a successful career for herself. And she had done it all without his help, without anyone's help. The next morning, Bradley decided to find out more. He made a few calls, using his business connections to get a clearer picture of Grace's company. What he discovered left him even more impressed. She had been making waves in the local investment scene for years, quietly growing her business and earning respect in the industry. It wasn't just that she had made smart financial moves. She had also earned a reputation for being fair, ethical, and incredibly determined. Bradley felt a sense of admiration swelling within him. Grace hadn't needed him to succeed. In fact, she had done better without him, but that only made him want to be part of her life even more, not as someone who could offer her support, but as someone who could finally stand beside her as an equal. That afternoon, Bradley sent a message to Grace, asking if they could meet. He wanted to talk, and this time he wanted to be honest about everything he had learned. Grace agreed, and they arranged to meet at a cafe they had visited before. When Bradley arrived, Grace was already there, sipping a cup of tea and watching the world go by outside the window. She looked calm, composed, and completely in control, a stark contrast to how he remembered her from years ago. Bradley sat down across from her, feeling a mix of anticipation and nerves. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, trying to gauge her mood. "Of course," Grace replied, her tone polite. "What's on your mind?" Bradley hesitated for a moment, then decided to dive right in. "I've learned a lot about you recently," he said, "more than I ever knew before." Grace raised an eyebrow, but didn't respond, letting him continue. "I spoke to an old acquaintance," Bradley went on. "He told me about your business, about how you've built something incredible. I wanted to say that I'm proud of you. I always knew you were strong, but I never realized just how capable you are." Grace's expression softened slightly, but there was still a guardedness there. "I appreciate that, Bradley," she said. "But I didn't build my business for recognition. I did it because I had to. Because I needed to make a life for myself and for Ethan." "I understand that," Bradley said, leaning forward. "But I'm still amazed by what you've done. You took something small and turned it into something powerful. That takes more than just skill. It takes courage." Grace sighed, setting her cup down. "I'm not sure what you want me to say," she admitted. "I've been living my life, doing what I needed to do. I'm glad you respect that, but it doesn't change what happened between us." Bradley nodded. "I know. But I want you to understand something, Grace. I'm not here because I want to take credit for any of this, or because I think I can somehow fix everything. I'm here because I see you for who you are now, and I'm proud of you. I want to be part of your life, not out of guilt or obligation, but because I respect you and care about you." Grace looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of insincerity. "That's a nice sentiment, Bradley," she said finally. "But actions speak louder than words. You say you want to be part of my life, but what does that mean? Do you want to stand by my side, or do you just want to feel better about yourself?" Bradley felt the sting of her words, but he knew she was right to ask. "I want to stand by your side," he said, his voice steady. "I want to earn your trust and Ethan's. I want to be there for both of you, however you need me to be." Grace's gaze softened, but there was still a hint of doubt. "I've heard a lot of promises in my life, Bradley," she said quietly. I need to know that this one is real." "It is," Bradley said, his eyes earnest. "I can't change the past, but I can show you who I am now, and I will, for as long as it takes." There was a long pause as Grace considered his words. Then she nodded, a small, cautious nod that felt like a victory to Bradley. "All right," she said, "but this isn't just about you and me. It's about Ethan. He's at a crucial point in his life, and I won't let anything or anyone disrupt that." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Bradley said. "I want what's best for him, too." Grace gave him a small smile, a smile that seemed to carry the weight of years of struggle and hope. "Then maybe we can figure this out," she said, "one step at a time." Bradley felt a sense of relief wash over him, a relief he hadn't felt in years. He had been given another chance, a chance to rebuild something he thought he had lost forever. But more than that, he had gained a newfound respect for Grace, a woman who had faced every challenge life threw at her and had come out stronger for it. As they finished their conversation, Grace's phone buzzed with a message. She glanced at it, then looked up at Bradley. "It's Ethan," she said. "He's at the bookstore down the street. Do you want to join me? I think he'd like to see you." Bradley's heart leapt at the suggestion. "I'd love that," he said, trying to keep his voice calm despite the excitement bubbling inside him. They left the cafe together, walking side by side down the bustling street. For the first time in a long while, Bradley felt like he was heading in the right direction. He still had a long way to go, but he was no longer walking alone. As they approached the bookstore, Bradley glanced at Grace, and she met his gaze with a look that was both cautious and hopeful. "We'll see how this goes," she said, "but I think we're off to a good start." Bradley nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. "One step at a time," he echoed, smiling. They stepped into the bookstore, and there was Ethan, browsing through a shelf of books, his face lighting up when he saw them. Bradley felt a surge of hope, and he silently vowed to keep earning these small, precious moments, one step at a time. The day of Ethan's graduation finally arrived, bringing with it a mix of emotions for Bradley. He had been looking forward to this moment, but now that it was here, he couldn't shake the nervousness gnawing at his gut. This was his chance to be part of a milestone in Ethan's life, something he had missed out on for so many years. But more than that, it was an opportunity to show Ethan and Grace that he was serious about being there for them, not just with words, but with actions. Bradley arrived at the university auditorium early, wanting to make sure he found a good seat. He was dressed in a dark suit, his shoes polished, and a bouquet of flowers clutched tightly in his hand. He spotted Grace near the entrance, talking to a few other parents, and when their eyes met, she smiled and waved him over. "Hey," she said warmly as he approached. "You look nervous." "I am," Bradley admitted, glancing around at the bustling crowd. "But I'm also excited. I didn't want to miss this for anything." Grace's smile softened, and she reached out to adjust his tie, a small, familiar gesture that made his heart ache. "I'm glad you're here," she said. "It means a lot to Ethan." Bradley glanced down at the bouquet in his hand, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "Do you think he'll like these?" he asked, holding them up. Grace laughed softly. "I'm sure he will," she said. "But it's not about the flowers, Bradley. It's about showing up." Bradley nodded, letting her words sink in. He had spent so many years hiding behind his work, convincing himself that showing up wasn't necessary, that it wouldn't change anything. But now, he understood how wrong he had been. Showing up was everything. The ceremony began shortly after they found their seats, and Bradley's eyes scanned the rows of graduates, searching for Ethan. He spotted him near the middle, dressed in a black cap and gown, looking both proud and nervous. Bradley's heart swelled with pride, and he found himself blinking back tears. This was his son, standing on the cusp of a bright future, and he was here to witness it. As the graduates were called up one by one to receive their diplomas, Bradley watched with bated breath, his hands gripping the edge of his seat. When Ethan's name was finally announced, The auditorium erupted in applause, and Bradley couldn't help but join in, clapping so hard his hands stung. He watched as Ethan walked across the stage, a confident smile on his face, and felt a sense of awe. Despite everything, despite all the mistakes and missed years, Ethan had grown into an incredible young man, and Bradley was here to see it. After the ceremony, the crowd spilled out onto the campus lawn, and Bradley followed Grace through the throngs of people, searching for Ethan. When they finally found him, he was standing with a group of friends, laughing and taking pictures. As they approached, Ethan's eyes met Bradley's, and for a moment, they just looked at each other, as if silently acknowledging everything that had led up to this moment. "Hey, Dad," Ethan said, a smile spreading across his face. "You made it." Bradley felt his breath catch in his throat at the word Dad. It was the first time Ethan had ever called him that, and it hit him like a wave. "Of course I did," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I wouldn't have missed this for the world." He handed Ethan the bouquet of flowers, feeling a bit awkward but hoping it would be appreciated. Ethan accepted them with a grin, glancing at Grace. "He brought me flowers," he said, pretending to be exasperated but clearly pleased. "Can you believe that?" Grace laughed, nudging Ethan playfully. "Be nice. It's a sweet gesture." Ethan's friends drifted away to join their own families, leaving the three of them alone for a moment. Bradley took a deep breath, knowing this was his chance to say what he had been holding back for so long. "Ethan," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I just want you to know how proud I am of you. I know I haven't been there for you, and I can't ever make up for the years I missed. But I'm so proud of the man you've become." Ethan's smile faltered slightly, and Bradley could see the flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. "Thanks, Dad," he said quietly. "That means a lot." Bradley hesitated, then continued, his heart pounding. "I know I haven't earned the right to ask for your forgiveness, but I want to. I want to be in your life, not just as someone who shows up now and then, but as your father. If you'll have me." Ethan looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing the sincerity of his words. Bradley could feel Grace watching them, her expression soft and encouraging. Finally, Ethan spoke. "I'm not going to lie," he said. "It's been hard, trying to figure out how to feel about all of this. But I've been thinking a lot, and I want to give you a chance. I want to see if we can make this work." Bradley felt a wave of relief wash over him, and he smiled, his eyes glistening. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I promise I won't take it for granted." Ethan nodded, then glanced at Grace, who was standing quietly by his side. "There's something else I want to say," he said, his tone more serious. "I've always been proud of Mom. She's the strongest person I know, and she's been there for me every step of the way. But I never really understood everything she had to do, everything she had to sacrifice, until recently. And I think we owe it to her to acknowledge that." Bradley turned to Grace, his heart swelling with gratitude and admiration. "You're right, Ethan," he said. "Grace, you've done more than I can ever repay. You raised an incredible son, and you did it all on your own. I'll never be able to thank you enough for that." Grace's eyes shimmered with tears, and she reached out to take both of their hands, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "I didn't do it alone," she said. "I had Ethan, and now, maybe, we can all be here for each other." For a moment, the three of them stood there, holding hands, connected in a way that felt both fragile and strong. Bradley knew there was still so much to work through, still so many things that needed to be said. But for now, this was enough. This was more than he had dared to hope for. As the evening wore on, Ethan suggested they grab dinner to celebrate. Bradley's heart lifted at the idea, and they made their way to a nearby restaurant, laughing and talking as they walked. For the first time, it felt like they were a family, an imperfect, complicated family, but a family nonetheless. At the restaurant, They toasted to Ethan's future, to new beginnings, and to the journey they were all embarking on together. The conversation was light, filled with jokes and stories, and Bradley found himself laughing more than he had in years. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt this kind of happiness, the kind that wasn't tied to business deals or financial success, but to simple, genuine moments shared with people he cared about. As the night drew to a close, Bradley realized there was one more thing he needed to say. He cleared his throat, drawing Grace and Ethan's attention. "I know we're all still figuring this out, and I don't want to rush anything," he said. "But I just want to say, I'm committed to this. To being here, to supporting both of you, however I can. I'm not going anywhere." Grace smiled, her eyes warm. "We believe you, Bradley," she said. "And that's a good place to start." Ethan raised his glass, a playful grin on his face. "To starting over," he said, "and to figuring out what comes next." Bradley clinked his glass against Ethan's, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in decades. "To starting over," he echoed, "and to whatever the future holds." They left the restaurant that night with full hearts and a sense of possibility. Bradley walked Grace and Ethan to their car, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude, "for giving me this chance." Grace looked at him, her smile gentle and reassuring. "We're giving each other a chance," she said. "That's what family does." As he watched them drive away, Bradley felt a surge of hope. He had spent so many years lost in regret, but now he was finally finding his way back. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be perfect, but he was willing to do the work. For Ethan, for Grace, for the family he never thought he'd have again. And for the first time in a long time, he believed that maybe, just maybe, he could make things right. The weeks following Ethan's graduation were some of the happiest Bradley could remember. He had finally started to build a relationship with his son, and he felt like he was slowly earning Grace's trust back. They began to spend more time together, meeting up for dinners, catching a movie, or just taking walks in the park. It was still awkward at times, but there were moments when everything felt right, when it felt like they were truly a family. One evening, Bradley received a call from Grace asking if they could meet. Her tone was serious, and it immediately made him uneasy. He agreed, and they decided to meet at the cafe they often frequented. When he arrived, he found Grace already seated, looking thoughtful as she stirred her tea. "Hey," Bradley said as he sat down, trying to read her expression. "Everything okay?" Grace looked up, and he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "There's something I need to talk to you about," she said quietly. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Bradley's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Grace took a deep breath, as if gathering her courage. "It's about Ethan," she said. "And about my grandfather's inheritance." Bradley frowned, confused. "What about it?" "There's more to the story than I've let on," Grace began, her voice trembling slightly. "You see, when I found out I was pregnant, I was scared. I had no money, no plan, and I didn't know how I was going to raise a child on my own. But then I got a call from my grandfather's lawyer, telling me that he had passed away and left me everything. At the time, it felt like a miracle, a way to give Ethan the life he deserved." Bradley listened intently, trying to follow where she was going. "I remember hearing about your grandfather," he said, "but I didn't realize you had such a close relationship with him." Grace hesitated, her eyes downcast. "We weren't close," she said softly. "In fact, I hadn't seen him in years. But he knew about you, Bradley. He knew that I was pregnant with your child." Bradley felt a chill run down his spine. "How?" he asked. "How could he have known?" Grace's hands shook as she set down her cup. "Because he had someone watching you," she said, her voice barely audible. "He knew who you were, and he knew about your family. When I went to him for help, he made me promise that I wouldn't tell you about the inheritance. He said it was the only way to protect Ethan. Protect him. Bradley's mind was reeling. Protect him from what? Grace closed her eyes, as if bracing herself for what she was about to say. From you, Bradley, she said. From your family. Bradley's heart pounded, and he felt like the ground was slipping out from under him. What are you talking about? He demanded. My family never even knew about Ethan. Grace looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and fear. They did, Bradley. Your father knew, and he was determined to make sure Ethan would never be a part of the Whitmore legacy. That's why I never told you. Your father came to me after we split up and made it clear that if I tried to come back, if I tried to involve you in Ethan's life, he would destroy me, and he would destroy you, too. The words hit Bradley like a punch to the gut. My father threatened you, he whispered, barely able to comprehend what she was saying. Grace nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. He told me that if I tried to claim any kind of support from you, he would use every resource at his disposal to ruin me. And I believed him. Your father was a powerful man, and I was just a scared, pregnant girl. So I took the money from my grandfather and I ran. I never wanted you to know, because I thought it would be safer for Ethan that way. Bradley felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He had always known his father was ruthless. But this was something else entirely. I had no idea, he said, his voice trembling. I swear, Grace, I had no idea he did that. I know, Grace said softly. And that's why I'm telling you now. I should have told you sooner. But I was afraid that if I brought this up, it would open old wounds and bring back all the pain. But I can't keep it from you anymore. You deserve to know the truth. Bradley's mind raced as he tried to process everything she was saying. His father had been willing to destroy Grace and Ethan's future to protect the Whitmore name. And all this time, Bradley had been living under the assumption that he was the one who had pushed Grace away. I can't believe he would do something like that, he said, his voice hollow. I can't believe I never knew. Grace reached out and placed a hand on his, her touch gentle. You didn't know, Bradley, she said. But now you do. And now we can decide what to do with that information. Bradley took a deep, shaky breath, trying to steady himself. I need to make this right, he said. I need to make sure Ethan knows that none of this was his fault. He does know, Grace said softly. I've made sure of that. But there's something else you should know. Something that might change how you see all of this. Bradley looked at her, his heart pounding. What is it? Grace hesitated, then took another deep breath. My grandfather didn't just leave the money to me, she said. He left it to Ethan. But there's a condition. Ethan is not just my son. He is also the heir to a substantial fortune that rivals your family's, and the trust he inherited gives him control over a large portion of our family's investments. Bradley's eyes widened. What? Grace nodded. Ethan is in a position of power, Bradley. More power than I ever had. And that's why I was so careful about how I handled this. I didn't want him to grow up feeling like he was being used, or like he had to live up to some impossible standard. I wanted him to have the freedom to choose his own path. Bradley sat back, trying to absorb what she was saying. Ethan was not just his son. He was also the heir to a legacy that could rival the Whitmore name. It was a revelation that changed everything. And you kept this from me because, he asked, his voice barely audible. Because I didn't trust your family, Grace said simply. I didn't want Ethan to be caught in the middle of a power struggle. I wanted him to grow up knowing that he could be whoever he wanted to be, without the pressure of family expectations hanging over his head. Bradley's mind reeled as he thought about everything that had happened, everything he had misunderstood. He had been so focused on his own guilt, his own mistakes, that he had never considered the possibility that there was a bigger story behind Grace's decision to leave. Now, for the first time, he understood just how much she had been trying to protect him, even when it meant keeping him in the dark. "I wish you had told me," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I wish I could have been there for you." Grace smiled, a sad, wistful smile. "I know, Bradley, but we can't change the past. We can only decide what to do next." Bradley took her hand, holding it tightly. "Then let's make sure Ethan knows the whole truth," he said. "Let's make sure he understands why things happened the way they did. And let's give him the chance to decide what he wants to do with that power. I'll stand by him, no matter what." Grace nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "I think that's the best we can do," she said. "And I hope, in some way, it brings us all a little bit of peace." As they left the cafe together, Bradley felt a strange sense of relief. The truth had been painful, but it had also brought a kind of clarity he hadn't felt in years. He was no longer burdened by the weight of his past mistakes, because he finally understood the choices Grace had made, and why she had made them. They decided to tell Ethan everything that weekend, and when they did, it was an emotional conversation, filled with tears, hugs, and a renewed sense of unity. Ethan listened intently, asking questions, but never showing anger or resentment. He was shocked, but he was also grateful that they had finally been honest with him. In the end, Ethan made a decision that surprised both of them. He decided to embrace the legacy he had inherited, not because he felt pressured to, but because he wanted to use his position to create something new, something that could bring their families together, rather than tear them apart. And as Bradley stood by his side, watching his son take his first steps into a new future, he felt a sense of pride and hope that he hadn't felt in years. He had lost so much time, but now he had the chance to make things right, and he wasn't going to waste it. For the first time, Bradley understood that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about facing it, understanding it, and finding a way to build something better from it. And with Grace and Ethan by his side, he felt ready to do just that.